Zapraszam, Ugo Mattei. Teraz I think maybe you could take it with you because I will make a short introduction in Polish. I would like to introduce.
Absolutely. Well, even if I don't understand it, probably better.
Jest nam bardzo miło gościć profesora Ugo Mattei. Jest to prawnik, można powiedzieć tak, Ugo Mattei jest prawnikiem, który wykłada w Turynie i w San Francisco, ale powiedzieć to nie powiedzieć nic. Myśmy po raz pierwszy z profesorem Mattei mieli okazję spotkać się w szczególnych okolicznościach, dla mnie szczególnych, myślę, że dla Ugo Mattei to codzienność. Spotkaliśmy się 3 lata temu w Teatro Vale Occupato, czyli w teatrze w Rzymie, który był wówczas zajęty przez pracowników, ludzi z ruchów społecznych i który starał się wdrożyć społeczny model zarządzania instytucją kultury, instytucją okupowaną. Ugo Mattei był jedną z osób, które starały się znaleźć prawną formułę dla instytucji, która byłaby współzarządzana przez zgromadzenie, czy byłaby po prostu zarządzana demokratycznie przez zgromadzenie. W wyniku tych prac powstał statut Fundacji Dobra Wspólnego, który bardzo często postrzegany jest jako wzorcowy model instytucji współzarządzanej społecznie albo zarządzanej demokratycznie. I mówię o tym również dlatego, że w polskich warunkach, gdzie bardzo silnie prawo nakierowane jest na kwestie relacji pomiędzy tym, co prywatne i tym, co publiczne, wyobrażenie sobie legislacji, która ujmowałaby kwestie społecznego zarządzania, współzarządzania lub kwestie dóbr wspólnych jest naprawdę czymś niezwykłym. Nie jest tak, że w Polsce nie eksperymentuje się z tego typu problematyką. Wśród ludzi, którzy dzisiaj poprowadzą warsztaty, są także aktywiści z grupy Otwartych Jazdów, czyli ludzie, którzy starają się praktykować społeczne współzarządzanie przestrzenią miejską tutaj w Warszawie na osiedlu Jazdów. I te instrumenty partycypacyjne, które są wdrażane przez Otwartych Jazdów we współpracy z władzami dzielnicy i miasta Warszawy, też w jakimś sensie wychylają się w tym kierunku, to znaczy wychylają się w kierunku uspołecznienia zarządzania tym terenem i uspołecznienia przestrzeni decyzji tego, co tam ma się dziać i jaka ma być jego przyszłość. Z drugiej strony mieliśmy do czynienia z niezwykle interesującym eksperymentem w Lublinie, Autonomicznym Centrum Społecznym Cicha 4. To był ośrodek, który funkcjonował przez 2 lata i który był zajętym centrum społecznym, w którym mieściło się szereg organizacji, grup. Natomiast to, co było ambicją ośrodka, było stworzenie instytucji klastera, to znaczy takiej sytuacji, w której oprócz tego, że w centrum autonomicznym znajdują się różne grupy i organizacje, to one wspólnie też tworzą demokratyczne zgromadzenie, które decyduje o całości tego doświadczenia. Więc te eksperymenty oczywiście w Polsce są, działają i również w niektórych przypadkach, jak w przypadku Otwartego Jazdowa, mają kierunek prawny, tak to nazwijmy, czy legalistyczny. Niemniej jednak wydaje mi się, że spojrzenie Ugo Mattei, czyli weterana walk o jurysdykcję na rzecz dobra wspólnego, byłoby tu bardzo cenne. Świetną okazją do tego, by gościć profesora Mattei jest książka, którą widzą Państwo przed sobą, która niedawno się ukazała i której profesora Mattei jest współautorem, The Ecology of Law. Mamy 5 egzemplarzy tej książki i dokonamy aktu rozdania tych egzemplarzy, ale ponieważ ich jest 5, a Państwa jest więcej, więc będziemy musieli znaleźć formułę, jak to rozdystrybuować. Nasza propozycja jest taka, że w pewnym momencie po prostu wylosujemy te 5 osób. Wydaje nam się, że losowanie jest taką uczciwą formułą. Na temat procesu losowania wypowie się Joanna Tokarz po tym, jak skończymy rozmowę z profesorem Ugo Mattei. Ok, a zatem oddaję głos Ugo.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And lawyers are used to be and are very well known for being extremely conservative and very, very much linked to old Roman times. And therefore I will start with the Latin side to try to give you some feelings of what I'm trying to discuss with you today and the spirit of it. Our ancestors used to say, "Theoria sine praxis, rota sine axis." That means that theory without practice is a wheel without the race. And praxis sine theoria cecum in via, and that the practice without the theory is like a blind man in the city. Okay? So theory and practice have to go together. And when I've been invited by the organizers, the Critica, to come here in Warsaw, for me was a great, great honor, and I was very humble of the invitation because I knew that I would have an opportunity to discuss the ecology of law and the itinerary, the intellectual itinerary that brought me there, with so many people that are actually those that are making the difference today. And so thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for being here. So I will remain faithful to my introduction and begin with some sort of a background theoretical discussion. And I will start, however, from the Teatro Valle experience, as it was mentioned before, and it's discussed in the book as one of the examples of construction of eco-legal institutions. Basically, we were there in front of the need to have some counter-hegemonic use of the law. In other words, the whole idea of the Teatro Valle Foundation was to take the legal system, as we have inherited from a long, long period of time, and to use it in a way that was the opposite one than the way in which the legal system developed and the purpose for which the legal system in modernity unfolded. In other words, the legal system, in particular the private law institutions, have been functioning and developing, and we will talk about that a little bit further later, as the construction of the backbone of capitalist extraction. Okay? In other words, private law developed at a certain, from the beginning of modernity, as a project of extraction of resources and of transformation of commons into capital. Okay? This is the fundamental assumption. Today, we have an institutional setting, which is the private law, that can be seen as the necessary backbone to capitalism. And there is no wonder that so many of the most important capitalist institutions, including the World Bank, the IMF, the WTO, do stress the legal aspects of their interventions very much. This is the first time in the history, probably, of humankind in which some institutions with no political legitimacy whatsoever do intervene directly in the legal system of a variety of states. This was not possible and wouldn't happen during the Cold War. The law was considered a deeply political artifact. there was no way that it was possible to intervene in legal systems that were not already within the political sphere of influence. The World Bank and the IMF, throughout the Cold War, would not give any money for work about the law. In fact, even the bylaws of the World Bank and the IMF, who are still in the books, do forbid the intervention in internal political affairs of members of the organizations themselves, and this was read systematically as no intervention in the legal system. Okay? Today, we will see that the legal system is possibly the most important target of intervention of these institutions. And one of the things that we will discuss later, and I assume that we will discuss that during the seminar today, is how to resist interventions that are outside of any sort of democratic legitimacy within legal systems, the interventions that do not develop and end up in being closed and uncommunicative and fascist, basically, but resistances that go in a direction that actually works as a generative process. Okay? So, at the Teatro Valle, we were in front of a legal system in the core of capitalism, that is Italy, with a private law system that developed for hundreds of years as a model of extraction, of construction of capital. And the question was, is the legal system part of the problem or part of the solution? Okay? If we look at the legal system as the backbone of capitalism, and we assume that commons policy, commons political activity, movements, are anti-capitalist expression of politics, we can say that law is part of the problem. Law is what we actually try to resist against. The legal system is organized in such a way that we don't like and we think that should be resisted. And indeed, this was the read of, for example, very important jurists in the 20th century, like Eugeni Pașucanis, to talk about the most important Soviet jurist that used to say, basically, that the legal system, the bourgeois legal system, was the only possibility of a legal system to be. The legal system being part of the very intimate structure of the bourgeois legal order, and the bourgeois legal order being part of the essence of capitalism. And therefore socialism or communism or any sort of alternative to capitalism have to get rid of the law. That was the read of Marx at the beginning, and in particular Pașucanis, that gave substantial intellectual foundation to that vision. And then, of course, during Stalinist era, it was overruled by Nijinsky, whose idea was we have actually to use the law to make socialism happen. We need to use the law, and we need to use the law in its most violent possible way, that is the top-down imposition of socialist legality, what was called socialist legality at the time. And of course, you know, Pașucanis was then executed, was tried, and the use of the law by Stalin was certainly something that was not at all a sort of soft or light vision of the legal system. Okay? So the legal system can be assumed as part of the problem, but it can also be used in a counter-hegemonic way. In other words, we can also and always consider the legal system as something that can be used to pursue results that are not the intimate structure of the legal system themselves, and these are the counter-hegemonic results. So the Teatro Valle Foundation was that kind of an experiment. That was an occupation of a public space. We were surrounded by enemies. We were right in the center of Rome. Berlusconi was in office. Was a little bit a situation similar to the one that you guys are having here, I guess. You know, we were trying to resist something that was possible maybe to be resisted physically, but very unlikely. You know, the cops are very violent and very strong. We needed some sort of tool of resistance. And we thought that the law would become part of the solution of that problem. Okay? So how to do that? And the idea here was pretty simple. We're going to use a private law institution, the foundation, a very old institution of private law, in order to claim that certain kind of goods are common. We are going to use a private legal structure to protect the commons, on the assumption and the understanding that as we are today, governments and political systems do not protect the commons. Okay? So in other words, governments do not protect the commons because governments deal with commons as if they were private property of themselves. We will talk about that in a second. Okay? How do we protect the commons? By using in a counter-hegemonic way a private law institution. And why we're doing that? And here we need to make a little bit of a broader understanding of the reason why private law institutions can be used to protect the commons, whereas transferring the commons to the public is not going to be a protection, which looks like quite paradoxical. Okay? The valley was occupied in order to resist a privatization. Okay? So the valley was not a private property, was public property run as a public institution, and the government in office decided that the private institution should be privatized. The public institution should be privatized. So the theater, public theater, oldest theater of Rome, extremely beautiful place for those of you who went there, with a very long history of dramaturgy and a long history of as a cultural center for theater in Italy, but had to be privatized. To do what? Well, to make it like a chic theater with a very fancy restaurant, apparently part of the Italy chain, you know, making it becoming some sort of an elite place to rich people in order to go there, have some nice food in the evening, and maybe having a little bit of a spectacle, okay, and enjoying a kind of nice elite kind of life, rather than being a public space, a theater that is open to everybody at a reasonable price. So that was the project. It was inefficient to run it as a public theater, therefore we're going to privatize it. So it's going to be run in a more efficient way, and by being run in a more efficient way means that those that were working there receiving a non-precarious status should be privatized, and you know, the usual things. And the price of the tickets will be higher, the quality of the performance maybe will be lower, who knows, but certainly, you know, it's going to be a project of privatization, and that's what was the resisting again. Now, if you ask a question, how is that possible, that a public theater is privatized, the answer is, well, it's the decision of the government. Government can privatize whatever they want, whenever they want. And there is no way for anybody to challenge a decision of a government in office to privatize any kind of public property. And we know that very well. You know, if the World Bank tells to our comrade Alexis Tsipras, go ahead and sell the port of Piraeus, or go ahead and sell the airports, or go ahead and sell the universities, and a government has to do that because it's under pressure, because it's, you know, threatened or whatever, and decides to do so, if any one of us would disagree with that, there would be no possible way to go in a court of law and challenge the decision. The government in office can sell whatever they want of public property, as if it was their own property. Too bad that governments in office last for a very short time, and property is accumulated, public property is accumulated over very long periods of time. When in the book here we talk about the city as a common, you know, build the city itself is the proof that it is a common effort, the creation of public spaces over long periods of time, generation after generation, to create common areas that have to be and that have been governed under the principle of access. You know, when you build a square, when you build a garden, when you build something of a common space, and the city is the intimate essence of the common, okay, we are doing that together, not just we, but also our ancestors. And we are supposed to give it back to the future generation. That's the idea of the commons. Access, long-term effort in construction, and transfer to the future. Okay? So it doesn't belong to anybody. If we close a place and if we privatize a public space, we are extracting value from a common. We are transferring a common into capital. Okay? So there is a place, there are some public benches, people can sit there freely. All of a sudden we decide to open a bar and to give it to a private bar. All of a sudden that kind of use of the place gets privatized. Okay? What before was just no part of the gross domestic product, was no economic activity, sitting on the bench, all of a sudden becomes sitting on a little bar and is part of the gross domestic product. So the only way, so the common gets transferred into capital. Okay? So the idea and the ballet theater were pretty much the same. The idea was the government in office will actually have the power to transfer into private hands something that doesn't belong to him. Even if Berlusconi was voted, even if the majority of Italians were giving him the mandate to govern, that doesn't mean that they gave him the possibility to decide over common property in general. But that is not what the legal system reflects, because the legal system allows every government elected to do exactly that, to take any common they like and make it becoming part of the capital. Introducing in their own kind of accounting structure the income of that capital over a short period of time, and having basically plundered the whole people of that particular value. No legal defense. There is no legal defense against privatization, period. Why? Because the structure of so-called liberal democracy, which is basically the legal structure of current capitalism, doesn't allow justiciability of the decisions to privatize. Look at around yourself and you find that over and over and over again. I'm pretty sure that anyone in this room knows some process, some project of privatization in which the government is going against the people, against his own people, out of some broader necessity to make the economic bottom line function. Okay, now get out of this mental frame for a sec and let's jump in the other opposite condition. I have a piece of private property. An apartment, a little garden, whatever, it's private. Now there is a public need. For example, we need that piece of private property in order to finalize a larger project of development to build something very useful, say a hospital, or anything that the public wants to do. Now the public decides to take that piece of private property, okay, and to take it away from the private, okay, and put it in the public use in order to do something that we all need. So this is exactly the opposite. Okay? Before we had something that was public that becomes private, and now we have something that is private that becomes public. Okay? If that happens, it's a legal hell. If I have enough money to resist, I can bring the government in the court of law. I can oblige the government to show that there is some public purpose in what it's doing. I can oblige the government to show me what kind of legal source it has used in order to expropriate my property. We talk about expropriation, even the word, you know, it already sounds pretty scary, okay? And of course, I can oblige the government to compensate me, and to compensate me at full market value. Of course, you know, over time, the structure of protection of private property against government got questioned. We are here in a former socialist country. You know very well that when there was the transition from socialist to market, however you want to call that, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the issue arose, what are we going to do with the private property that was expropriated by the communists? Should we return it? Should we pay those people back? What should we do with these people? They were expropriated. And there were hundreds and hundreds of litigations throughout the, the former socialist countries of people that said, well, I had a private property before, now they expropriated my private property to build socialism, now these guys failed, we are back into capitalism, give me my company back, give me my intellectual property back, give me my apartment back, give me my castle back, whatever, okay? So we have a completely opposite scheme. When you take something from the public into the private, you have to prove lots of, you face a lot of legal hurdles. Anybody can litigate and resist. If you get something from the public into the private, nobody can do nothing. So what do you do in front of this? This means that we lack an idea, a legal institution that is that of the common, that finds some sort of legal protection. We don't have that. So if we don't have that in the current contextual situation, how we're going to build it? Well, very simple. Let's use private property in a counter-hegemonic way. Okay? So if we can construct a common as a foundation, which is actually a private law institution, then if that institutional governance is done in such a way to allow participation, to allow collective decision-making, to allow access, and we make that part of the DNA of that private law institution, then tomorrow that the governments want to try to transfer it into the private sector or into the public sector, we can protect that as private property. So that was the idea. If the Valle Foundation can become a private law institution whose governance, whose internal DNA, rather than the DNA of capitalist extraction, is in fact the DNA of generation and participation, and we can build access within the institution itself, then we can protect that institution through the ordinary legal system against every attempt to change its purpose by any government in office. So we claim that the people, those that access the good, are actually sovereigns as property owners of that particular piece, that particular good, that particular relationship, and we will say that, the idea is that to change, to see the law as an ecological structure, so to see the law not as a subject-object opposition, but as a relationship, that particular relationship can be protected today with the current legal system as a private property against the government who will try to expropriate it. This is going to be, and is, extremely important for all our struggles. Okay? We are surrounded by governments that cannot be considered friends anymore. No government can be considered a friend of the commons, because governments are structured in a way of centralization of power, and relationship with the object, relationship with the political body, which is a dominating relationship of power centralization and exclusion, that is structurally opposite to the common relationship. Okay? So the idea of the Teatro Valle was, let's build a counter-hegemonic institution using private law ideas to protect the common rather than to privatize it. We don't trust the public anymore. We can trust the creation of new institutions. And actually this might look very paradoxical, but actually governments, the only troubles governments are having today is when they actually try to expropriate some private property with a compensation that is below market value, because the European Court of Human Rights will come in and say, no, you cannot do that. You cannot take away that property below market value. You have to compensate the owner, because otherwise you are violating individual rights of extraordinary values that are written down into the European Charter of Human Rights. This is where we are now. We are back in a position of property protection as a natural right of individuals against everybody else. Okay? So this has been actually a change, because over time, the rediscussion of the proprietary order and the idea that governments could actually limit private property emerged in legal scholarship and in legal decisions and in courts of law and in statutes. But now it is simply impossible for government to actually introduce some social value of private property because the courts of law at the European level will say no. Okay? So here is where we are. Here is where we are now. How we got here? And here I will move to another point. I hope this is clear, right? There is the fundamental constitutional imbalance of liberal constitutionalism that protects private property and doesn't protect the commons. And in order to overcome that imbalance in the current conditions, you have to use private law in a counter-hegemonic way. This is the first point I want to make here. Second point, why we got there. And here I will take a kind of a coup de théâtre. We are talking about theater. And the coup de théâtre will be this. We are commoners. We are part of, we consider ourselves as militants of the commons in one way or another. And we are, when we have in our DNA the vision that actually Garrett Hardin's The Tragedy of the Commons is evil. Okay? Everybody considers Garrett Hardin the bad guy. The commons received a sort of intellectual damnation by Garrett Hardin. Everybody only talks about the commons as the tragedy of the commons. The idea that access is going to have disastrous ecological outcomes. That actually we need private property in order to protect the commons. And that was an ideology. And then we have someone, Elinor Ostrom in particular, who was kind of one of the goddesses of our movement, that comes out there and says, no, 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 that is not true. The commons are in fact not tragic. There is a lot to say about many, many different commons organizations that actually allowed us to govern common pool resources for long, long periods of time in a very desirable way, in a very sustainable way, out of some sort of construction of institutions of the commons that Elinor would call common. Okay? So our ideology is Garrett Hardin bad, Elinor Ostrom good, Garrett Hardin has it wrong, Elinor has it right. And therefore, let's start from Elinor, and from there we go ahead. Now, I want us to stop a moment, because whenever there is a common understanding at the pre-rational level by a large number of people, even if these people are my beloved comrades, okay? Even if these people is you, I still want you to stay for a sec and look it critically into the narrative, okay? Now, is it really true that the paradigm of the tragedy of the commons is wrong? Can we actually suggest for a second that actually Garrett Hardin had it right when he said the commons is a space of no law, okay? When there is no law protecting the commons, there is going to be space for predatory behaviors, accumulation, short-term incentives, attempts to externalize, and then we can get more technical, distinction between private function and social functions of well-being and all these things. Is that really wrong? And what I'm saying is, well, it depends. Because it is true that the commons assume the homo economicus. The tragedy of the commons is part of the neoliberal construction of the idea of the homo economicus. Okay? The idea is, well, in front of the commons, everybody behaves as a jerk, the homo economicus. Everybody tries to get only his own well-being in the very short term, and therefore the outcome for everybody is going to be tragic. And this, Elinor said that, no, this is not true, because people actually many times behave as commoners, develop relational conditions, do love each other, do care for each other, do worry about their kids, do have hearts that bleed, do have empathy, do have all these sort of things, and therefore the homo economicus is just ideology, which is true in a way, for flesh and blood living human beings. It's true for me, it's true for you, it's true even for the other out there, if there are human beings. But what if they are corporations? What if instead of being human beings, they are artificial beings endowed with rights, constructed in such a way to function as extractive machines? Do corporations have feelings? Do corporations really behave as homo economicus? And my answer is emphatically yes. The corporation behaves exactly in the way in which Garrett Hardin says that everybody behaves in front of the commons. The corporation has structure in its DNA exactly the kind of behavior that makes it functional over a very, very short function of extraction, opportunism, no worry for everybody else, no relationship, just accumulation. And they actually can do it. Humans don't. Everybody, even the worst jerk, care for someone. Okay? Even the most bourgeois individual, selfish and despicable, will actually love his children. Okay? Or will actually have something, in America where there is a lot of kind of selfish approach in society. There is this very nice post in Berkeley where I spend a lot of time. There is written, drive here as if your children were living here. Which is very, very scary because it looks like, well, if someone else's children I drive like crazy, who cares? But if my children, then I care about that and I slow down. Okay, so this is the critical idea of the purely self-centered jerk. Okay, so if his stuff is going to be at stake, then he's going to behave properly. But if it's someone else's stuff, who cares? Even if they're children. Okay? It's the critical thing. Now, everybody who is a human being in flesh and blood will behave not as a homo economicus all the time. But everybody who is a corporation will behave as a homo economicus all the time. So if only we take Garrett Hardin model and we put the corporation instead of the individual person as the actor of that model, we will see that actually the model works. Now let's take another little step and say, when Garrett Hardin says, well, the commons is the place of no law. And Elinor Ostrom said, no, that's not true. The commons is not the place of no law. The commons is the place of the law of the commons, which is a different kind of social organization. Maybe it's not formal law, but it's just, customary practices, informal legal system, and so on and so on. But there is no common that is the place of no law. Again, is that true? Well, it might be true. But if we look at the word as a sort of unique place, just one word, in a very broad ecological way, so we take the whole, and we look at the whole, what do we mean when we say it's a place of no law? We mean that it's a place of law that cannot restrict the behavior of the predatory actors. No law doesn't mean that there is no law out there. It means that there is no way for a collective structure to control the behavior of the private subjects. It means impotent law. No law doesn't mean that there is not a lot of charters. There are a lot of charters in international law. If you read the papers, if you read international law today, Charter of the United Nations, the Covenant of Human Rights, the rights of the children, the Covenant of Social Rights, you get it. You have the best possible world. Children are protected, there is no exploitation, sustainability is enforced, everything is there. But too bad that international law doesn't bind, doesn't bite, has no way to function. It's just a piece of paper. You know, as Rota was saying, you know, the law, when not enforced and when not interpreted in a way that bites, is just, you know, drops of inks in a piece of paper. Drops of inks in a piece of paper. Okay, so what we have today is the tragedy of the commons on the global scale with no law, that means no binding legal system, against homo economicus, which is the corporations. And in fact, the corporations cannot be bound by the law today. If you look at the Supreme Court decisions of the most powerful jurisdiction in the world, which is the United States, the only jurisdiction that in principle you could say, well, maybe it minds a little bit, you will simply see decision after decision after decision that the corporation cannot be held accountable by the legal system at the global level. It just goes decisions after decisions after decisions. Even the most important international jurisdictional statutes, they don't want to get very technical, but we have cases, 2013, Kyoto, and many others, that just say, well, it doesn't apply to the corporation. Why? So we have the tragedy of the commons at the global level. Third step, okay? So Elinor Ostrom is a good critique when it comes to commoning as behaving in front of a urban garden. You know? Yes, the good people that are us will behave as commoners in relationship, loving each other, but we are marginalized in a little bit of our own very minoritarian getting together and living together, when the real game happens elsewhere. And we know we love to stay with each other, and I do personally love to stay with you guys a lot, but we are kind of playing with our little ideas of people actually can create their own institutions of the commons in very little niches, when the tragedy of the commons is going on at the global level with the corporations that are actually controlling the legal system worldwide. How we got there? And my claim, and the claim in the book, is that we got there by design. Okay? It's not some sort of a natural course of events. It's not some sort of a natural evolution of some sort of law of, law of nature. But it was actually a conscious design of construction of institutions of capitalism that are designed to transform commons into capital. And we've been going over and over and over time with the legal system that was designed and works exactly for the purpose of transforming the globe into a common, tragically victimized by extraction. It is a strong claim. There is no question there is a strong claim that there was a design, but this design, of course, was not a design of one guy, was not a design of some sort of evil person out there, was a collective design that is the design that was put together by social elites in the 18th century, in the time of the scientific revolution, by constructing the mechanistic vision of reality that produces scientific positivism and produces our own way to interpret and see the reality around us. That was the claim. And the proof of that, in a way, and of course we discuss historically how we got there, and what are the actual legal institutions that created this extractive order. And we try to actually connect every institution to the brain of the person who actually invented it. Pretty much in the same period of time. Ugo Grotius, very, very famous international law guy, one of the founding fathers of legal naturalism, 16-year-old when he passed the bar in Holland, Dutchman, very bright guy. At 18, he was already the lead attorney for the East Indian Company. Okay? The East Indian Company was like Google today. Okay? Was the biggest, most important capitalist institution, the proto-capitalist institution of modernity. These guys had created a structure that actually Ugo had invented and masterminded, with a very smart theory of the commons, incidentally, to roam the world and to behave globally as if, as a predator, as a homo economicus in the global legal order. Going out there, you know, east and west and north and south, getting as much as possible of common resources, bring them back in Amsterdam and make them capital. Okay? And to do that, you need a very modern legal system. A legal system based on the idea of the separation of the capital of those that risk the money in the company and the capital of the company itself. So the legal personality, very, very important. You need freedom of contract. You need the possibility actually to transfer any kind of resource from whoever values it less to whoever values it more. And I'm using this word because I know there are economists in the room. That would be the Pareto principle. Okay? Freedom of contract. You take anything, you can exchange, you can negotiate over everything as long as you can claim that someone values it more. Whatever that means. But freedom of contract develops exactly in the same period of time with people like Jean Domas, for example, who was a big friend of Blaise Pascal. They were living in the same areas, between Paris and Amsterdam. There was an intellectual coine of people that were the enlightened people of the time that were busy constructing the institutions that created legal modernity. Liability by fault. Again, another extremely powerful legal institution and legal device that will allow anybody to start an enterprise, to take risks, and to externalize the bad outcomes of his risk activity on everybody else. As long as they behave as reasonable people. They are not at fault. So if I behave as the good entrepreneur, and the standards of course value in society across time and space, then, you know, if things go wrong, well, you know, too bad. I don't have to pay damages because I was not at fault. Again, the fault principle develops the way it developed exactly by those people in that period of time. And the examples multiple. Okay? So the legal system that was created and developed in a certain particular moment, that was the period of the scientific revolution, was actually modeled around the fundamental need to transform commons into capital. And you know, we have many examples in the book, and we follow the history. I don't want to, you know, whoever will be lucky enough to win the lottery will actually be able to maybe read some pages of the book before falling asleep. Okay? Now, all of this has created something that is very remarkable, and one would wonder why, you know? And of course, if we see it from today's perspective, as we should, we actually have to look into history to learn about our present. Which is in fact something that, incidentally, I open a little bracket, is something that we are strongly discouraged in doing. Because in the moment in which we discipline our knowledge, as we do, and we create sociology as the science of society, political science as the science of politics, economics as the science of economic activity, and history as the science of the past, and we build social theory around these fundamental four queens of knowledge, and there are other sciences, there are some that don't qualify, like the law. You never know whether it's a science, lawyers struggle to become social scientists, they're not really recognized as such. Is it humanity what it is? Stays out. Anthropology, what's that? Well, it's sociology for the others. So in a way, it's like, it's like part of the thing, but it complexifies it later. But on the other hand, our view of social science is economics, history, political science, and sociology. And the implications of these organizations of knowledge is staggering. Social activity has nothing to do with politics. So civil society is not politics. Politics is part of professionalism. Social movements, people like us, we're not really doing politics. In the general understanding, I remember when I was campaigning for the referendum of water in Italy, I would go around and some people that like me said, "Oh, professor, why don't you do some politics?" I say, "What am I doing? What am I doing? What the question is this?" But in fact, the idea was politics is running for office. Okay? Is actually participating in elections. Then the other implication is that, of course, economic activity is something that has nothing to do with politics, nor has to do with civil society. It's a pure economics. Political economy is gone as a category, and now we've been, since the marginalist revolution, we were into economics. Okay? Again, implication of discipline knowledge. And, finally, and most importantly, history becomes the discipline of the past. When we are historians, we are those that deal with stuff that happened before. And that's a way to make history politically relevant. That were mistakes of the past. We used to have slavery. We used to discriminate black. We used to this, we used to that, the past. Once we were like that. Once we had the ghetto. Once we had those kinds of things, we don't have that anymore. But this is again a strategy. So if we want to learn from knowledge, from our history, we have to break those barriers. Those barriers of learning are dangerous because they create capitalism as a regime of knowledge. And we cannot walk alternatives if we don't see them. If we don't figure out alternative possibilities, we simply cannot move away from the status quo, which is exactly what disciplining the knowledge is about. We don't want people that say, well, maybe economic activity is political. Maybe it is not true that we don't have slavery anymore. Okay? Maybe today the market flexibility is something that we passed before. Maybe austerity is not something that is new of today. These kinds of things. Okay? Now, we went to this kind of regime of knowledge for a very specific purpose. And the very specific purpose, again, was transfer of commons into capital. Why? Well, because we needed it. There is no question that in the 17th century, and even before that, people needed to actually accumulate some capital. There were lots of commons out there, huge amount of commons, forest. Europe was basically a forest. Water, food, animals, shelter, everything was in the forest. Okay? And if you have a lot of forest, and you don't have cities, or you have very tiny cities, London was 12,000 people. Okay? We're talking about tiny human organizations surrounded by wilderness. Okay? Amsterdam was the capital of the world, was like a small village today. Okay? So, there was a need of transforming some of those commons into capital, because without capital you could not build hospitals, you could not build schools, you could not do all sorts of things that are actually arguably good, at least for some, which is progress. Okay, progress and innovation in a variety of areas. So there was a need for that. But now, do we still have that need? Now we actually don't. Because now we are at the polar opposite conditions of the conditions that were at the time in which Spinoza and Locke and Jean Domas and Blaise Pascal and René Descartes and all sorts of the founders of modernity, positivism, mechanicism, Newton, Bacon, you know, of the scientific vision of reality, the spirit of modernity. Now the conditions are the polar opposite. Now we have staggering amounts of capital. The capital is huge. When there was the last capitalist crisis in 2008, the one we're still living, I don't like to see things as crisis in capitalism. Crisis, to me, capitalism is an endemic condition of crisis. No. Anyway, the crisis of 2008, it came out very clearly that we had, you know, financial capital concentrated in private hands for a value that was about 10 times the gross domestic product of the world. Okay? So, we certainly don't have a lack of capital. However, if we look at the reality of the ecological conditions of the planet, we see that we have a dramatic lack of commons. There is no one common in the world, the ecological one, fisheries, forests, species diversity, whatever, you name it. You name it. I mean, I don't need to go through that. Read Plan B of Lester Brown, for example. It's a fantastic collection of those data, available online for free. Read Plan B, and you see every single indicator of the state of the commons in the planet is red. Blink, 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 blink. Alarm, 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 alarm. Do something, do something, do something, do something. Okay? Every single indicator. So now we have no commons, huge capital. At the time we had no capital, huge commons. Want to talk about commons in the social sense? Don't want that they say, oh, you know, Mattei has a vision of the commons like little kind of green, 1970s green. No, no, no. The sophisticated vision of the commons that we all have, which is, there are not just natural commons, but also social commons. What are social commons? Relationships. Okay? Common structures. All of those blank, 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 blank too. Intermediate bodies are suffering. The extended family is dying. Commons ownership of land in Africa is plundered. Again, you name it, every single institution. There are no solidarity. The trade union, syndicates, you know, etymological syndicato, syndicate, means being together with justice. Okay, that's what the trade union means, what the syndicate means. Being together with justice. Okay, everything that is together with justice is gone. And still we have the same legal system. So it's really like the thing that we denounce in the book and we try to, you know, say is, well, you guys, you know, now we have the analysis, we have the science, we know that that vision was historically rooted in a certain position, in a certain needs, and it's an old vision that was okay at the time, it's not okay today. Scientists have it right today. They know that Baconian spirit is, and positivism is not a good way to interpret the natural reality anymore. Ecological thinking is triumphant in science, yet when we come to social institutions and to social science and to the law, which is the mechanism that makes that stuff binding for everybody else, we are still thinking like Jean Domas and Grotius. So we are still functioning with those old institutions. So finally, final point and then close. Question, of course, that we always have to say is why? Why? How is that possible? We know so much. We have so much of the theory. We have the theory. You know, Einstein and Heisenberg and quantum data. You know, we have the theory. We have the tools, the law. We don't have the social theory. Why that happened? And the question is, it happens very simply because of the way in which the corporation functioned the way it was supposed to function. That is the possibility to grow forever and to live forever. Every one of us at some point dies. Okay? Some earlier, some later, but you know, there is a moment in which our damages to society will stop. Okay? Or our good to society or our damages to society at some point will stop. We get old and we die. But Goldman Sachs never dies. You know? They started in 1930. Anybody who was around in 1930, like my mother, now would be almost 90 years old. Okay? Goldman Sachs were around in 1930, was a small group of consultants for rich people in New York City to invest their money. Okay? And now is a 500,000 employee organization. And among these 500,000 employees, there are a large number of prime ministers, of central bankers that are all paid by Goldman Sachs. So its growth, its power accumulation, its success has been so amazing. And just Goldman Sachs is one of the examples. But if you think about Facebook, if you think about Twitter, if you think about some of these new hyper-powerful corporations that are giving us the tool of emancipation. This is going to be something I want to discuss in the discussion. We cannot talk about everything. But those kind of corporate structures, in just 10 years, 15 years, they became amazingly powerful structure of concentration of capital. Much more powerful than the governments in which they operate. Much more powerful. Facebook has a population that is larger than India and larger than China, okay? Facebook is actually controlling the political setting of the United States. There is nothing that can be decided politically by anybody in any government in the world that would not be determined and controlled by some private concentration of power. The political arena, in the sense of the hierarchy of politics, the way it developed back in the 17th century and even before, Jean Baudin and Hobbes and all these thinkers and these guys, the idea of concentration of power and sovereignty that is still determining the way we look at reality is simply ballooning. The concentrated power of governments is weak. Governments need to be protected against private sectors. The private individuals are stronger than governments, than any kind of government. This is the structural reality of our time. Either we face that, and we stop believing, like idiots, that the political setting of our life is determined by professional politicians in public office. And we spend a lot of time trying to see and discuss whether we should run for the mayor or here or the prime minister there, and whether we can get a majority here or the majority there. And we don't understand that the places of political confrontation today are not and cannot be those traditional places in which we see the tools of the political action. But they should go through a transformation in the way in which we organize and think the law, and we interpret the reality. If we don't see that, we are bound to lose over and over and over again. And with us, of course, something much worse is going to lose, which is the viability of civilized life on this planet, which is already losing quite badly. Okay, I will stop here for the moment, and then we can move in. If we have some discussion, I can definitely deal with something more concrete. Thank you very much. Just take some water.
I wanted to speak Polish, but since maybe I could think, Bardzo dziękuję. Trochę jestem przygnębiony po tym wystąpieniu, ale w czasie, kiedy będę wydobywał się z przygnębienia, przede wszystkim zapytam, czy Państwo mają jakieś pytania lub komentarze do tego, o czym mówił Ugo Mattei. Czy coś domaga się do szczegółowienia, albo były jakieś fragmenty wystąpienia profesora Mattei, które zwróciły Państwa szczególną uwagę?
I do thank you for this journey and different ways of seeing the tragedy of the commons as well. And you mentioned very strongly, you know, these corporations who have the ability to survive human beings and being a different actor in the tragedy of the commons. I remember this latest mutation of the corporation as a being. At least in the States, there's this kind of B corporation, as they call it, with some kind of certification from another corporation, to say that gives them these apparent extra qualities of being more transparent or socially oriented. And this is a question I would like to, if you can elaborate more about what this kind of mutation in this being could reflect, because probably it's not so good.
Yeah, this is a very good question. And also, you know, I want to take the chance to answer to you and to you together. I gave you the bad news, but the good news are in the book. So don't be gloomy, don't be depressed. There is no just, you know, read the book at some point. I mean, the idea is we need to know where the enemies are. We need to know where the places of contestation should be. We need to have a very, very clear picture of where we are in order to decide where to go, okay? And then, you know, being in the politics of social movement for too many years, especially in the politics for too many years now, knowing that we spend a lot of time struggling against the windmills, okay? And we don't see where the targets of action should be, okay? And so, in a way, I just try to make a the bigger picture, saying, okay, this is actually where we are. It's not going to be easy, but it's not true that there is no way out, okay? And there are a lot of actual possibilities of transformation. There is no need to be depressed, but we need to understand very clearly both the reality and the tools we have in our hands, okay? First of all, and I glanced at it, I said, okay, for example, you know, we are victims of disciplined thinking, okay? They discipline our thinking in giving us this sort of partition of knowledge in certain ways, so that we don't communicate and we don't see where the issues are. So one first very important residue, perhaps the most important one, is capitalism is a regime of knowledge. It's much more than an economic system. It's not just an economic system, it's almost a religion. It's a regime of knowledge, as much as it was before modernity, was the church, you know, the vision, the theocentric vision. And now we are living in a regime of knowledge, and all regimes of knowledge can be changed by exercise of critical thinking and intellectual alphabetization. So it's not true that capitalism will be forever, it exists in some sort of transcendent way. Capitalism is us, okay? Its relationship is us in our everyday way of functioning. And therefore, you know, we can transform it, but we need, you know, to a big process of alphabetization, of understanding, of taking into consideration where the issues are. This is one point. The law has been constructed. This is the part of the book that I haven't discussed here. But the law has been constructed as a pre-existing scheme, mechanic scheme, like the instruction of the IKEA for building the furniture, okay? There is something out there that is the legal system, against which exists, okay? Against which we can measure social action in this sort of dichotomy. On one side, the legal social actions, and on the other side, the illegal social actions, okay? And so good people would be against illegal social actions. This is again something that is constructed culturally by mechanistic vision and by positivism. There is not such a thing as the law as some out there thing outside somebody who actually obeys or disobeys it. Okay? And constituent disobedience, that is to say breaking of the law, conscious breaking of the law, in order to make it change in a direction that is generally necessary in order to overcome the current emergency, is actually a very commendable activity. If you guys have a chance, I know that doesn't happen often, but if you have a chance to travel in the south of the United States, in a city that is called Memphis, Tennessee, very well known for the Elvis Presley and the sort of the capture of the black music by the white industry, as I regard Elvis and that kind of idea. But anyway, if you travel there, you will find a fantastic thing that is called the Museum of Civil Rights. That is worth a trip by itself, okay? It is done at the hotel where Martin Luther King was murdered. And the whole history of the black civil rights movements in the United States is actually described in an incredibly well done way. And there is no one of these things that is described there that was legal. That museum can be considered a chant of illegality. Rosa Parks was illegal when she refused to leave the seat to the white guy sitting in front of her. The guys who were the Freedom Riders that were traveling from north to south of the United States, going there and sitting in the whites only legal spaces, decided that Plessy v. Ferguson by the United States Supreme Court were breakers of the law. They were committing trespass. Trespass is an illegal act, okay? So the civil rights movement has been a movement that could not exist outside of illegality. So the next time someone tells you you are doing something illegal, say, yes, I do something illegal all the time, as Rosa Parks did. I want to do that. I need to do that. I have a duty to do that. I have a duty to civilization to make children to everybody. There is no single progress in the world against power that doesn't go through or against legality. Okay, so the first and most important enemy of political movements like ours is to fall in the trap of the distinction and the distinction between legality and illegality, as if legality was something existed exempted in a sort of unchangeable way, okay, as if there was an out there in the law, an object. Here is Cartesian, Descartes, in his full strength. Descartes in its full strength, the res extensa, okay? The law being a res extensa, out there. I regard nature as a mechanic entity, as a machine. Nothing else than a machine. That was the vision of Descartes. Law, people regard law as a machine, as something that exists there and that we have to measure with. Law is us. Law is the people that internalize under deeper understanding and are willing to take risks and to put their life at stake to violate the legal system. Because the legal system can be illegal, and actually is illegal most of the time, when it goes against fundamental long-term visions that allow society to survive. That is another important thing. So the claim of the idea that there is not such a thing as illegality, which is just constituent breaches of the current legal order. This is very, very important, because it is the kind of things that make social movements weak. You know, you right there and say, oh yeah, of course, but the ballet theater is an occupation, it's illegal. That is a squatting, it's illegal. Even the parties in government, you know, justice and law, you know, this kind of thing, that there is such a thing out there, okay? Against which we measure everything. In Italy, we are surrounded by the rhetoric of legality, you know? Because it's a very powerful rhetoric. Especially in places that are ridden by mafia, as Italy, you know? So it's a tiny, difficult, you know, but that is, you know, gaining back principles. Gaining back principles in the legal order. And this is what ecology is about. It's actually having a vision of the legal system that is legitimate, but that can be against the previous legal order. Now, B corporations, actually it's a B corporation, Barrett Kohler, the publisher of this book, is actually a certified B corporation, according to California law. Can B corporation be the solution, or can be one of the solutions? I don't know if it's going to be the solution, but I certainly think that, you know, the corporate charters, as the DNA of the multinational corporations, are themselves not something that is cast in stone, are themselves something that can be transformed by political processes. I served for a few years in the water company of Naples, and the whole idea was, how are we making a water company becoming actually a common rather than a public, rather than a company belonging to the mayor. And they tried very hard to do that. And the result was that I was fired. But I was not fired by some, you know, mean corporate private interest. I was fired by the mayor himself. That actually thought, well, you know, if we're making a company that is a common, then I'm going to lose my power. Okay? Then I cannot take that money out of selling the water on the market for paying my campaign or for, you know, taking care of my constituency. So this is the question, you know, the distinction between the public and the private, the way it is structured, the lack of commons institutions, and the need to produce and create commons institutions, of which B corporation can be certainly one way, but to do that, you know, you cannot really do that through the traditional political process. I don't believe in any transformation of the current legal order that goes through a political process that today is captured by private interests. It's like, you know, when you say, oh, you know, the ethical codes of the corporations. Oh, now everybody's good, nobody goes to DACA anymore to do any sort of, you know, exploitation of the workers down there. Now there are good companies, they put even the face of the, you know, heart-bleeding liberal that says, oh, please buy my product, I'm not exploiting the children. But then we are the ones that actually buy a pair of shoes for 20 euros, and we know that if we buy those shoes for 20 euros, those shoes are actually bleeding. Those shoes are actually, those 20 euros are just my tiny share of the cost that is bared by the workers, is bared by the environment, is bared by the transportation system, is bared by all the externalities that are produced today. So this is why you need an ecological vision. So I totally agree that, you know, tackling private corporations in their DNA is very, very important. And changing the DNA of corporation is actually a possible way out, or at least one of the way out. It's not going to be the only one. There is no only one. The only one, I think, is the no only one. That is to say, having enough critical thought that creativity in performance of illegal constituent breaches of legality to create a new legal order will happen eventually. You know, teaching the kids how to think ecologically, after telling them all the time, which is the first thing you have to say to every young militant person. And here, you know, we are all mature, or at least not as young. I mean, some are very young, but not as young as young kids in schools. The first thing I tell them, stay out of jail. Okay? Try not to get arrested. Try not to get yourself in trouble, because nobody does a revolution from jail. Okay? But, you know, said that, so trying to survive, everything else is actually an exercise of critique that is strongly important in making an order. And this is where we're going, and the B corporation is one of the things. It maybe is a moderate one, but goes in the right direction.
Yes, now we have to musimy, now we have to decide, musimy zdecydować, because it's good that we have a short break before I invite Philip Eino. Bo dobrze byłoby mieć krótką przerwę, zanim zaprosimy następnego gościa. Czy są to pytania, are those questions które możemy przenieść do kuluarów? I wówczas zaprosilibyśmy na przerwę, czy jesteście bardzo zdeterminowani, żeby zadać je teraz publicznie? I co na to inni?
I remember certain kind of meetings that maybe are those that create the participation fatigue, which would discuss 3 hours whether to take actually meetings. So, you know, the meta discussion of the method. I think we should get maybe another couple of questions very quick and then do the break. And anyway, the conversation is going to be the same in the next meeting and the one after, because we actually are trying to develop a system of thought, right? And trying to transform that system of thought into action, into education, into, you know, ecological thinking ultimately. And so I don't think that there is going to be a real break. So we can maybe a couple of more questions if there are people that feel like talking now. It'd be nice, but okay. Yeah, it is okay.
Very short one. What happened with the foundation, foundation, legally at the end?
Well, as soon as it was legally approved, the place has been everybody has been kicked out. So it really backfired in a way, because in a way it was part of its success to backfire. Because the moment in which the foundation became some sort of a legally existing, recognized thing with, you know, an authority that was willing to say yes, it is legally done. Okay, then is where the government got in trouble. So then, before facing the whole thing, you know, in a few months, the center-left government of the city actually decided to kick everybody out by shooting off the electricity and all that kind of thing. But you know, and that for Italy was for the Italian movement of the commons was a huge loss. You know, not so much because the foundation is there. You know, has became the idea of using the law as a strategy became very, very important. It was very generative for sure, because it's been contaminating many other experiences, not only in Italy, but we lost the hub. You know, so the physical part of our attempts to create an alternative is very important, and these physical positions are usually need to be in very symbolic places. You know, the Valle was especially important because it was like 30 yards from the Senate, in the heart of the city of the country, in the most beautiful and old city of theater of Rome. I mean, there was this whole symbolism, which is the semantics of the movement, the semiotics of the movement that we have to think about. And this is why I believe a lot in the relationship between the arts and the culture and the commons as a political expression. And this is why I think the European Cultural Foundation is doing a great job, because that is the only way in which you can actually do have political empowerment in a diffused way. Yeah?
But the decision of the movement was to go out without confrontation.
Yeah. Well, there was. I mean, this is a pretty sad part of the story. There was a lot of division. Was a very, very agonized decision to make. There was, I think, I was among those that thought that it was useless to actually get physically kicked out, because there was no, in that moment, any real political attraction. There would be nobody going there mobilized to go to save the Valle Theater. You know, if it had happened with the fascist mayor of Rome before, in 2012, 2013, one could have expected to have, tens of thousands of people to go there and to defend the place, and that would have become like a real constitutional moment. But in 2014, in the summer of 2014, we had our shot was with the elections of the presidential elections, that in which the Valle had produced its own candidate and had gone very, very close to, but that was very badly run politically for a variety of ways. And in 2014 the condition had changed. The movement was alienated. The Valle was insulated in part. There was a lot of critique going on. I mean, the whole thing was there was a closed body of people willing to resist, but they were not enough. So that's been a stupid, to me at least, delay of a couple of days without any intent to negotiate, and I thought that there could be some chances to negotiate, and the negotiation was carried on badly, and so the whole thing went badly. But I still don't think it would have been worthwhile having the cops arriving there, but I may be wrong. But I was definitely among those that thought there are no political conditions for resistance now, because I knew a little bit the movements around the country, and I knew that there would be nobody really going there to fight. So if you don't want to go to a war if you don't have soldiers, you need to have the soldiers first. Yes.
In Poland we do it in a variety of ways.
The famous horses against the tanks. Yeah.
Two questions. One of them is speculative in a way, and the other one, maybe if you think that I can find the answer in the book, just say it. The first one is, as I understand, I'm a sociologist by training, so my mastership of law terminology could be kind of tricky. If we assume this division between private and public law, and every of these realms has a subject to govern it. It's the individual, or at least not to govern, but responsible in a way, or the main subject of this realm, and on the public is the state. If we think about this third realm or something like the commons, what, and this is the speculative question, how the subject that will govern it, like to, in a way, to be the central figure will look like? That is the first question. And the second question, much or almost all of our talk is in many ways Eurocentric. We're quoting only European authors, and of course you understand why is this. But are there any other models of governing the commons outside of this Western paradigm that we can take inspiration from, that we can kind of principles that have already been elaborated and there is no need to invent from scratch?
Yes, very good. That's a fantastically good question. Actually, yesterday I was in a meeting we had in Torino on this one. It was called Reply to the Crisis, Practices, Inventions and Institutions. So it was basically about the similar things that we're discussing today. And we were talking about co-housing. And co-housing is actually becoming very hot in Europe, but if you think about it, every sort of village in Africa does co-housing. You have, small pieces of individualized property that is not enough for actually living there, and there are lots of public areas and spaces where, there is common cooking, common caring of the kids, common activities, common, so it's co-housing means basically trying to go back to some sort of more village-like organization. And it's very interesting that we kind of put an English name and it looks very modern and new, but in fact, there are many other experiences out there that already has always functioned for centuries. This is actually a point we made very clear in the Ecology of Law. We started the book saying, we try to place responsibility where it belongs. Responsibility for the construction and the function of capitalism becomes in the West, and therefore the critique of the system of knowledge that this capitalism has to be based in the West. So that is, there is no ethnocentrism out there at all. I don't think that the institutions of the commons should be a third way. Okay, I do believe that if we can look at very roughly an opposition. There would be on the one side the private and the public, which are, and this is again what in the book we develop, private and public are institutional settings based on concentration of power and exclusion. Both of them. Private property is about, I am the decision maker, subjective decision maker, okay? And I decide, I concentrate the power of this place, and they can exclude everybody else from here, trespass. Public is the sovereign state, concentrates the power in the government, excludes from the border. So there is the same logic on the one hand. The logic of the commons is diffusion of power and inclusion, okay? Diffusion of power and network. So it's two different logics that are out there. Institutionally speaking, what I think is the question that I'm working on now with other people, but that's where we are all working in a way, is how we do construct institutional settings that go beyond the universal vision of the self and the individual at the center of the political life. Okay? Individualism and individualization are the most important part of the regime of knowledge of capitalism. Now we need to, they're based on the idea of rights. My rights, you know, the idea of the putting the rights at the center, excluding the obligations, excluding the relationship, you know, the rights, the solipsistic right that is produced and created very much by also by technology and all this kind of things. How will you do what is the opposite of rights? And the idea is the book we talk about community, you know, and of course community creates a lot of issues that we are all aware of, and I hope we discussed of them, but the point is how you create a community of interests and passions, you know, that can be at the center of an alternative legal vision. What we call about la comunitaria riferimento, okay? When we talk about in the Valle statutes and then in the other local regulations that we passed after that, there was this idea the commons should be governed by a comunitaria riferimento. What is the comunitaria riferimento? How it does qualify as that? That is a community of passions, is a community of interests also. It's based in conflict, internal and external, has certain kind of specific features that we kind of are slowly understanding and putting in context. But I don't think the comunitaria riferimento is just a third model. I think it has a vocation of being a bottom-up transformation with a real strong potential for revolutionary transformation. And this is the good news that I was talking about.
Yes, do I need a microphone? Okay, you mentioned a bit earlier that the front line of contestation has moved from the narrow political sphere to this very broad area of how to call it corporate politics. But then what shall we do with the state, with these sources of law, with sovereignty? How shall we deal with that?
Very good. That's a good question, and of course I was reading, I know that might not be very popular to talk about, but anyway, I was rereading recently, in the last few days, some pieces of Lenin, you know? When he was talking about that, when he was talking about, you know, the party as the vanguard of the revolution and blah blah blah, and of course I was, you know, purging it of all sorts of the vision of the party as concentrated power. But it seems to me that if we look at the way in which, for example, talking about learning lessons from elsewhere, the way in which, for example, in China, during the march, power was taken and organized by the Communist Party, was a completely non-state-based organization of power. So it was basically taking away areas of control through alternative institutional organization, alternative schools, alternative ways of production, alternative models that connect themselves in a very proper way. In Italy, before the Stalinist turn of the Communist Party in 1948, 45, 46, you know, when Togliatti went down to Salerno and announced the move that was, now the communists are gonna run within the institutional setting of Italian constitutionalism, the Communist Party was an illegal organization that was completely diffused through the countryside was based on a process of subjectivity making, was based on a huge process of organized participation that lasted for a long period of time. There was a time in which there was no internet, there was nothing of this kind of tools that we believe will give us an emancipation, but it was easier. You know, the communists would know the results of elections before the ministry, because they had such an organization throughout the Italian territory that their way of knowing the results of the election was faster than how the official system would give the results. That is to say, organization, organization, and organization. And this is why, you know, I really believe a lot in what, you know, Critica is doing, for example. You know, having this sort of diffused organizational effort to actually ultimately have a body that can reply with some sort of collective action. Because today, in my own country, and this was not like that probably in 2013, but today, you know, if we had to call for an emergency reaction to some kind of crazy move by the government that is happening all the time, it happened with our constitution very recently, we simply had no way to say to the people, come into the streets. We simply had no subjectivity capable of resisting against the degradation of the construction of the, you know, fascist concentration of power, because there is no organization. And, you know, Twitter will not do that. Forget Twitter, okay? Twitter will not do that. There is no, so the point is, you know, believing that we are organized because we have like a network of Facebook or Twitter or whatever, that is not what we need. We need institutional construction that works taking away the ground from governments and being ready to put the bodies, the physical bodies. You know, we are in the domain of biopolitics now, and we need biopolitical capacity to react, which is cannot be delegated to technology. Don't know whether.
But the question was about what we do with the instrument of the states.
Proszę do mikrofonu.
Yeah. Well, I think that
this is still out of the instruments of the state. This is how to challenge it.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, there are some of us, some comrades that still believe that it's worthwhile spending a lot of time running for elections. Good for them. You know, that's fine. I mean, I'm all for them, and I will probably vote for them. But we should know at this point very, very clearly that capitalism has this fantastic mimetic capacity, okay, to get everything that looks against capitalism and turn it into a powerful capitalist institution. Look about ideas such as the sharing economy. The sharing economy has produced Airbnb and the taxi company, and Uber, okay? Airbnb, 3 days ago, won the referendum in San Francisco to protect the current extractive system of rent seeking. Okay, so there was a referendum trying to make it illegal to put out, you know, to put all the houses out on Airbnb that had created a huge increase in the market prices with homelessness and all this kind of results. And Airbnb spent $5 million, $5.3 million in a referendum effort, you know, to defeat a referendum effort. So this is a very good example of the mimetic capacity of capitalism to take a good idea, sharing, and to transform it into a machine of extraction. Okay? So this is what we have. So I believe personally that today what they've been doing in Greece with a very honest and admirable comrade as Alexis Tsipras, which I admire deeply, is a proof and an exercise in having capitalism work with leaders that are anti-capitalist. Okay? So this is what they're doing. You take now the next experiment is, what if Corbyn wins in England? What if you know, the other guy lives in the United States? Yeah, if Bernie wins in the United States, it doesn't matter. Capitalist legal system can work also with non-capitalist leaders. And this is the experimentation in Greece, to me. So, fine. I mean, I do believe that revolution is like, they say that many times, the revolution is like burning a huge stack of wet wood. Ultimately, will fire, but it's going to be very, very difficult, and certainly will not fire if you only try it from one place. Okay? If you try it from one place, you can try forever, won't fire. Try it from many places, nobody how, at some point, might fire. Okay? This is what I'm saying. So, comrades that want to run for office, fine. I'm going to vote for them. I don't think that is the only, or I think that the share of intellectual and heart energy that representative politics is today claiming from the movement is too high. That's what I think.
Thank you very much. Okay, so Ugo, thank you very much for your intervention.